Breakpoints in Webflow let us design not just for desktop computers that match a single display size, but for all kinds of devices in both directions. Styles cascade down to smaller devices and up to larger devices. We're going to cover some of the basic concepts involving breakpoints, and we'll cover some advanced stuff too. We'll do style and layout as it relates to breakpoints, how to add additional larger breakpoints. We'll talk about how you can preview what your design will look like on a much, much larger display without having to go test that design on a much, much larger display. We'll cover how to override styles, how to clear styles, how to test not just responsiveness, but fluidity in your design, and that's it. Let's start with style and layout. And we'll start on the base breakpoint. Changes here on the base breakpoint will affect all devices, all breakpoints by default. Here's how. When you design something on your base breakpoint, by default, all your styles, your layouts pass down to smaller devices. The heading here is the same size on all devices. That's expected. When you make a change, let's make a change to this heading style. We'll choose maybe a different font size, maybe closer to 60 pixels. One immediate thing to notice, the label for that property, the font size, is now blue. That indicates that there's been a change to a property, the font size, on our current view, our base breakpoint. And if we check out the other views, the other breakpoints, that change was reflected in the smaller devices. In fact, let's go back to tablet here, for example, and with our heading selected, we can just click that label. Notice how it's more of an amber color. And we see that we're getting that 60 pixel font size from our base breakpoint, from our default desktop breakpoint. But here's where breakpoints come in handy. Maybe that change looks fine in tablet, but it's a bit cramped in mobile landscape. If we make the change there on mobile landscape, if we change to something more like 40 pixels, we know that label, the moment we made a change, turned blue. That indicates there's a value, our font size, set on this breakpoint. And we already know that change will pass down towards smaller devices. But check this out, that 40 pixel font size, it didn't affect tablet. And it didn't affect our base breakpoint. Both of those are still 60s. Changes to style and layout always originate here at the base breakpoint. And they cascade. Changes always pass down to smaller devices, and they pass up to larger devices. And this isn't just for font size. Let's look at our section. It might make more sense, maybe starting on mobile landscape, to remove some of that extra padding on our section here. Let's drop to something maybe closer to 20. We're holding down Option or Alt and dragging to adjust both sides at once. And we can do the same with our other section. It has a lot of padding by default. Let's reduce that. Let's drop the padding so we can really respect the limited screen real estate on a mobile device. And everyone's thinking the same thing. It doesn't look great with text running up against the edges. That's okay, because breakpoints. Now, saying because breakpoints doesn't fix this. In fact, outside of the hopefully short-term colloquial removal of from the English language, because breakpoints adds no value at all. But here's what does add value. We can select our container. We have a plain default container inside our sections, and we can add some padding here on mobile landscape, maybe 10 pixels on each side. And not only does that fix the container, but it automatically generated a class. We can see in our selector field that a class named container was automatically created. But because web design is built on CSS and classes are magic, we can select any other containers. This is any container on the page, in fact, anywhere on our project, and we can apply the same container class to those. We'll also do this on the container in our navigation, in our nav bar at the top. And it'll inherit. Any container we apply that class to will inherit the padding we added on the left and right. But what about our grid on the bottom? Things start getting pretty cramped here, but they're also a bit close on tablet. In tablet, let's go in and edit our grid. Right now, it's 3 columns. It has 3. So let's remove one of them. Let's switch down to mobile landscape. We can change the font size here later, but let's look at mobile portrait. And 2 across is definitely a bit much for such a narrow display. Let's change that. Let's go in and make our grid, instead of 2 columns, let's make it 1 column only. And because changes cascade down, if we go back to mobile landscape, we still have 2 columns there. In fact, let's click the amber indicator for columns, and we can see we're inheriting the 2-column design from tablet, which we just did a few moments ago. Let's close out of editing our grid, and let's change the font sizes a bit. Our top one, our main heading, let's type in a different value like 30. Same thing for the subheading. Let's select that and make it maybe 20. Again, this will be on a mobile device. We want to reduce that margin, that space underneath the text, to something a bit lower, like 30. And let's do the font size on the lower text too. We can make these headings have a slightly smaller font size, maybe something closer to 20 pixels. And we can do the text underneath, the little paragraphs underneath the headings. Let's make those 15 pixels. All these changes, as we know, cascaded down to mobile portrait. And just like that, we optimized a design that started on desktop, but we made it work for tablet, mobile landscape, mobile portrait, and NES. That's cascading in one direction. What about larger devices? Well, if we go and add a breakpoint, let's add our 1280 breakpoint, which is good for the MacBook Air or the 13-inch MacBook Pro. On larger devices, changes do the same thing, but they cascade up. So if we go back to our base breakpoint and grab our heading, if we go into our color picker and make the text color something like pink, that color change will pass down. We can check it on tablet, mobile landscape, and all the way down to mobile portrait. And it cascades up too. Our 1280 breakpoint has a pink heading. In fact, let's look at the property label. We see it's amber because that value, that pink color, is coming from our base desktop breakpoint. Fortunately for our eyes and our sanity, there's an undo button. But what if we make a change here in the larger breakpoint, 1280? That change will affect even larger displays. Let's increase the size, the maximum width of our container to something more like 1200. And since we have that same class, our container class applied to the container in the bottom section and in the nav bar on the top, changes affected those containers too. Again, if we go back to our base breakpoint, it's still the same as we left it. Changes cascade from the base breakpoint towards smaller and larger devices. But that also means changes to our 1280 breakpoint, they'll affect even larger sizes too. Now, a lot of people might stop here. That's okay. Larger breakpoints are entirely optional. In fact, that's why they don't show up in a new project by default. For us, let's explore adding another one. This is our 1440 breakpoint. This is most larger laptop displays like the 16-inch MacBook Pro, the Surface Book when you're in landscape, and maybe here it makes more sense to widen the container even more. It's still 1200 pixels from our previous breakpoint, and we can confirm this with the container selected by clicking into the amber indicator. We're inheriting the 1200 max width from our 1280 breakpoint, but maybe we can do something different on this view, like 1360 here. Again, this can be whatever you want it to be. Notice, of course, it turned blue because we've added an override. We've added a new property to this view, to our 1440 breakpoint. That's good for now. Finally, let's add 1920. This is the 21-inch or 27-inch iMac, the Pro Display XDR, most 1080p or 4K monitors by default. And here we're going to do a couple of things. But first, we need to move to scaling. And here's why. A second ago, we showed our second largest breakpoint, 1440. We said this was the breakpoint for the 16-inch MacBook Pro. And in Apple's own tech specs, they list the pixel width on that display as 3072. So, by that math, the 16-inch MacBook Pro should be in the biggest breakpoint, way beyond our largest breakpoint, 1920. So why do we say it's in the second largest breakpoint? And the answer is this. For most users on high DPI or Retina displays, whether they're using macOS or Windows or Linux, they'll use scaling. Most manufacturers have this on by default, and it means the display is still using all the pixels on your screen, but assets are smoothly scaled up. Apple does this really well in their display settings. As you hover over each scaling option, they use the language looks like to describe that even though you're using all the pixels on the screen, things will be scaled to look like those resolutions. So, do you have to do the math? Do you have to reference page after page after page of notes on different displays, different devices? You can, but we also have common device widths right at the bottom. Let's go back over to our 1440 breakpoint. And if we want to preview what things might look like on a MacBook Air or a 13-inch MacBook Pro, we can just grab towards the edge of the display, resize our canvas, and we can see there's the 13-inch MacBook Pro. But it's not just on this breakpoint. Let's go down to mobile portrait as another example. We can do the same thing. We can grab the edge of the canvas and we can drag. We can preview what the design looks like on different devices. In this case, an iPhone 11 Pro. But scaling solves another challenge. If we're on a 16-inch MacBook Pro and we want to design for larger displays, how do we make that happen? Well, here we are on a 16-inch MacBook Pro. And all we do is we click the breakpoint. the canvas will automatically scale to preview what the design will look like at a width of 1920. You can still select, you can edit, you can do everything you normally do, but the elements, the whole page, will be scaled. We can even go beyond this. Want to see what it looks like on a 27-inch iMac? That was the actual iMac, but if we want to do the same on our MacBook Pro, let's go in and type 2560. That's what it looks like on a much larger screen. In fact, we can go over to the edge, we'll hover over until the canvas edges turn blue, and we can click and drag to simulate an even larger canvas. Everything will automatically scale. In fact, let's finish this part on the MacBook Pro. At any time, we can go in and type a value, type a width into the canvas settings. We'll go back to 1920. And things are still scaled, but that's okay. Since we have a lot more space, let's go in and set the container width to something even wider. Again, we set it to 1360 on our previous breakpoint. Let's set it to 1700 here on our largest breakpoint. And with all that extra room, let's try something different. Let's go into our grid. And instead of 3 across, let's add a few columns and make this 6 across. By the way, if you're not using CSS Grid, it's magical. Except it's not magic, it's CSS. And just like that, we've created another change that will affect all displays that are 1920 or larger. The change didn't affect the other breakpoints because, as we know, changes cascade upwards to larger devices, just like changes cascade downwards to smaller devices. That's scaling. What about overriding styles? Well, we've been covering cascading, but something to note here, this is a pretty common pattern. Let's say we're on tablet and we change the button color. With the button selected, we're changing its background color. And because our tablet breakpoint is the only place we change the color, that means it passes down to smaller devices. And it does that because no button color has been set on mobile landscape or mobile portrait. But how do we override that change? On mobile landscape, let's change the color again. Let's just change the background color to something obviously different. And when we do, the result, of course, is that the tablet button color is just as we left it, but we've overridden that color on mobile landscape. And because changes cascade in that direction, mobile portrait has our new color too. In fact, that's how overriding works. That's the whole point of breakpoints. You start on the base desktop breakpoint and make a series of overrides on the other devices. Those overrides pass down to smaller screens, and they pass up to larger screens. That's overriding things on different breakpoints. What about clearing things? Let's get one thing out of the way. Everything we're talking about applies to style changes and changes to our layout. If we delete something, even if we're only editing in this view, this breakpoint, that thing is deleted from the page entirely, and that element is gone from the document. It's not visible on any view. Let's undo and get our heading back. And the second thing here is this. If we manually move it in the document order, over here in the navigator, if we move the heading, that change, that move, will apply to all views, all breakpoints, unless we've done something to manually override that change with styling. Let's undo that change so the heading comes first. But when we want to clear or reset a style, maybe we don't love our changes to the button color. On tablet, for instance, we might want to remove that override, remove that changed background color. We just click in and reset. If we go in, we can see that background color is now coming from our base, our desktop breakpoint. Did that destroy the rest of our work on the other views? Not at all. We still have the styling changes we made on mobile landscape. Same thing here. We can remove that, we can reset the style, and when we do, we remove the color we added before. What about mobile portrait? Well, since we reset the changes we made in tablet and mobile landscape, the button's styling, we can click in and see this, it's passing all the way down from our base desktop breakpoint. And that's the main idea. When we make style changes on different breakpoints, they apply to those breakpoints. And like we've said a bunch of times, styles cascade down to smaller devices and up to larger ones. But because there are 1,000 things we can change and control, it really helps to click through and see how your design looks and functions on each display. And that leads us to testing responsiveness and fluidity. Responsiveness is just the idea that stuff responds to the width of the browser's viewport. We can click through to see how everything looks on each breakpoint, and we're able to see our design as it applies to those device widths. In fact, if we hover over any of our icons here, we can see the pixel width, that starting range that each breakpoint affects. But then there's fluidity. these aren't fixed widths at all. In fact, like we showed earlier with the MacBook Pro and the iPhone, you can grab the handle or even the edge of the canvas here and click and drag to test how everything's responding. On each view, each breakpoint, you can test your design on all widths. But it gets better. Go into preview mode at the top, and from here you can click and drag and it'll automatically switch breakpoints when you hit the end of each device's range. That means you can test to make sure your design cleanly responds on all display widths, exactly how you want it to respond. And that's it. We covered a lot. That's because there's a lot to cover. But breakpoints are really powerful because they let us design for lots of devices without needing to redo our work on every single one of them. So we covered breakpoint styles and layout, how to add larger breakpoints. We showed scaling. We talked about how to override styles, how to clear styles, how to test responsiveness and fluidity. And then we faded to black just a bit too early.